I want to talk to you about a plane that I've used all my life, ever since I was about 15 years old. It's a Stanley number 78 Fillister. It could be any other maker that makes this type of plane. It's what we call a rebate plane. It could be called a rabbet plane. It could be called a Fillister plane. They've all those titles, and it's a really useful plane if you're working on rebate. So that's what it was designed for. So you've made your door, you've got it hung, you hang it in the frame, it's slightly twisted. You can take this plane and plane a little bit off the stop. The door has expanded over the night, and you come in the morning, it's slightly too big. You might not want to take it off the door because you put finish on it, and the frame still has to be finished. So you could take a little bit off the rebate with this by taking off the depth stop, taking off the fence, taking off the guide bar and things like that. And you could adjust, you can use it for all manner of things. What I want to do is put this to the piece of wood for what it was originally intended for, and that was to create rebate. So the rebate is the recess that the window sash goes in, the door goes in. Could be a rebate to put an inlay in, and all kinds of things like that. Let me break this apart a little bit for you, just so you can see the different parts to it, because the adjustment has to be catered to. So there's my fence, that's my long fence going across here. This is my depth that guarantees the depth of the cuts so I don't go past. So I've got a 3/8 rebate, I go down to 3/8 of an inch. Inside here, I've got this 3-spur cutter here, and this is out of the cutting position, so it's been retracted. When I take this screw out, turn this around and have this protruding, it protrudes past the sole. And where I would use that then would be that little snicker at the foredge there would cut the rebate ahead of the cutter, so it would be cutting a wall on this piece of wood, and it would allow the cutter behind that to pick up the wood without tearing the surface of the grain. Without that, this rebate plane will not cut across grain. So that's what that's for. Adjustment is a reverse cantilever, which is commonly used on planes. And that means that the head of the screw on this side, when I start to turn this, it elevates this end, and that presses down on the forepart of the blade right behind the cutting iron. So when this is in place, it presses down on the forepart, and it works as a cap iron that puts pressure on the blade and forces the shaving up. On the underside of this is, you can see the adjustment mechanism. This is a corrugation in here, just slots that have been cut into here. There are grooves in this adjustment bar here, this lever, so I move this up and down, and this gives me the micro adjustment I need to set the blade to a deep or a shallow cut. Perfectly simple. So let's reload this in here. What you have to do is guess which slot it's going to go in, and then move this forward to see if the blade protrudes past the sole, which it does. So I bring it back and then slide this into place. A little awkward, doesn't always go in easily straight off. That one did. And then you can see I've got a gap here and no gap at the bottom. That's critical to the well-being of the plane. It's not a question of setting this and tightening this screw. This is purely an adjustment screw. So as long as this is high enough on this side and that's low enough to tighten against the back of the blade, the plane will work. The blade itself is wider than the base of the plane. People think that's a flaw and sometimes file or grind off the side of the blade. But it needs to slightly protrude past whichever side is cutting, because that gives the relief to the cutting edge. If it's flush with the side, it won't cut, and it'll keep moving away from the wall that you're creating and make an inaccurate wall. So that's there for a reason. So there's my fence in place. I want a 1/2 inch wide rebate. I take my ruler, measure it. So there I am, right on 1/2 inch, just showing off. And then I want my depth set. I want to take 1/4 inch off. So set this. This has a little groove, a V groove in here in the side. And on the other side of the casting of this shoe is a piece that corresponds to it. So that makes the fence, this stop, stay vertical and the foot parallel to the surface that I'm going to be creating the rebating. So cinch that tight, make sure everything is locked down here. I'm set. So that's it. So whatever size rebate you want, you can go up to about 1.25 inches wide. If you take this fence off, you can actually go wider, but you don't have the benefit of the fence. So here we go. We start at the nose. I'm taking no cut, so I'm going to lift this lever on the back here, just a little, until that blade starts to engage. There, it's engaged. If I want less of a cut, I just press this down just a hair. And I start at the nose and I work back. I've got the blade lined up, it's protruding just past the side. And once I'm in, I can take fuller length cuts like this. What you've got to watch out for is what just happened there is often, because of the design of the plane, the shavings will clog up on the inside there. Just prod it through the side and you're back in action. So there is my rebate forming. It's really a neat plane to have for that very purpose. There it is. What about cross grain cuts? I'm often asked about that. Cut, let's take a look at this and set this up for a cross grain cut. Now it's not going to work in the vise as I just clamped it in, because the end of the plane is going to catch on the fence is going to catch on the vents on the bench. So we'll show you what we do there. Let's take this and put that spur cutter that's on the inside of here and turn it round. Now we're talking cutters here. There's a little tiny cutter, there it is, that's on these leading edges. So you rotate this a half a turn. Sometimes it's just easier to take the whole screw out. Just rotate it that half turn, drop it back into those other two slots that are remaining. And my spur cutter is just protruding past the sole by about a 32nd of an inch, I think, something like that. Lock it down, make sure it's tight. Take this out while I'm here. Careful you don't catch the cutting iron. You don't want any corners removing on the blade itself. I should remind us of that. The blade wants to go tight into the corner. You don't want to do a rounded edge if you might have thought that, because we do that with smoothing planes. This plane we don't do that with. Okay, so it's sticking past. I'm not going to go too deep with this, just enough to get you to see exactly how it works. Lock it off. The fence is still locked off in the same position. What I'm going to do is clamp this to the bench top, because that's really the only way that I can do this. It works really well. Good sharp plane. This is one of the things with any of the rebate planes. You want a good sharp plane. You want to make sure you've sharpened up before you start the task. Sharpen that little spur if it needs sharpening. Lock it off there. So we're nice and firm. And then this one, so we're letting that little spur cutter cut ahead of the plane. So it cuts in both directions. It cuts on the reverse stroke and it cuts on the forward stroke, because it's a little radius. So there is my first cut. I've got this pristine cutting edge. It looks beautiful. It looks like my knife wall. So it's going down very nicely. I've got my rebate done. Now you do have to work a little bit at keeping it parallel to the surface, but now I'm down, so my stop here is hitting the surface of the wood. So the stop hits the surface, it won't go any more. If I do want to go more, I simply adjust this depth, move it up a millimetre, 2 millimetres, 1/4 of an inch, whatever I want, lock it off again, and I can carry on going. If I want to be more aggressive with the cut, you don't want to be too aggressive with this spur cutter because it's only just penetrating the surface. So now I've got a heavier cut. But look what I got. I got a really lovely surface to my piece of wood. It's very nice. It's exactly what I want. So that's the sash Fillister, the Fillister plane, the rebate plane, the rabbet plane. Doesn't matter what you call it. It's a wonderful tool. And it should complement your woodworking tool collection. And it should be, I wouldn't say essential unless you're doing a lot of rebating work, but it's a great tool to own. It's one to have in your toolbox and enjoy using. I just want to, before I go, just show you one element of this that I want you to get clarity on, and that's the little spur cutter that goes into the recess. Let me take this off out of the way and take this cutter. This is a cutter. And that's what I want to show you on the other side of this. So I undo this screw. I'll take it all the way out. Oops. Here. And each one of these, this trefoil here, this three-sided thing, can be sharpened. 2 of these are not sharpened, they're just square. But the one that I want you to see is this one, because it has a radius on this way and it's got a bevel following that radius. So it's actually a cutter. And it's very important, this cutter. It has to be sharp because it's cutting across the grain. And when this is in the plane, it protrudes past the sole of the plane by not much more than a millimetre, if it's more than that at all. A 32nd of an inch, something like that, is plenty. It doesn't need any more because you don't take heavy cuts when you're going across the grain. It just doesn't work. So that's that, and that gets registered in here when it's in the cross grain position. Those two make it really secure. Put the screw in, and then it's sticking past the sole, and I'll try and show you that as well. It's a wonderful plane, really. It's wonderful. This cross grain cut is beautiful. When I put the straight edge against the tip of the protruding cutter there, that spur cutter, and rock it back and forth so it touches the sole, it's protruding about a 32nd of an inch. When I put the straight edge on there, I can see it's in good relation to the blade, the main cutting iron. So when I use this on the wood now, it's exactly the right depth of cut. I would never take a deep depth of cut with this plane going across the grain. So it's set. That's what the spur cutter does, and that's its relationship to the main cutter. And I think this is an amazing plane. I enjoy having one. Not necessarily essential unless you're doing a lot of rebate cutting, but it's very handy to have, and I think that this is a plane that you would enjoy for a long time.